And oh, we're live. Hello. Good morning. Good evening. All right.
Hi everyone.
Yeah. Welcome to another office hours, open source office hours. I think we'll start as we've been starting with some announcements. So, does anyone have announcements they want to make in the last week?
Um, I have implemented the degrouped bar chart component. Uh, I walked through your through Jan's component, the bar chart vanilla, the D3 bar chart. I guess there are three of them. Uh, I think they totally make sense. So I made my own, and it would be good if you can share your opinion about it sometime later when you have the time to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have it up on GitHub?
Yeah, sure.
Did you put the link in the chat, and then I'll take it
Yeah,
down in notes. It's cool. Um, Nate, do we have any announcements from Lever's side on Derby and Racer, anything like that?
Not this week. We had a company retreat last weekend where we talked a lot about hiring. So I guess one thing is Lever's hiring a crap ton of people, and then this weekend I'm going to be at a wedding, so I will not be available. So probably not a lot from me right now, but hopefully soon, once we hire some more people, I'll have more bandwidth.
For sure. I did make one minor change to LiveDB, which all I did essentially was make it so that when you delete a document through LiveDB, it leaves around the metadata. So LiveDB currently automatically adds this _m object to every document snapshot with a timestamp so you can know when the snapshot was last modified. And you can optionally also add other metadata to that, with LiveDB middleware. And in our application, we store the user ID and application ID. Account ID on every operation, and then also on every snapshot. And this has actually saved our butt not too long ago when a customer, I guess, decided to read the Derby docs and did a for loop over some of their own data and deleted a bunch of their tags. Like, we're still not sure what they were thinking, but we know exactly who did it and when it happened, because all the data was in the ops, and of course we were able to roll it back using the op log. But yeah, so it's just nice to have that metadata around, and we're going to be using the metadata even more extensively to do like real-time re-indexing, or I guess indexing of document snapshots, so that when anything gets changed, it gets sent to like our search index, which right now is Solr, and also our reporting data warehouse. So yeah, it's a small step in that direction. And I believe we talked about the dirty queue in a previous hangout, and it just kind of ties in with that.
Yeah, there was one more thing. What were we talking about yesterday? There's a thing which we haven't done yet, but we realized is that sometimes we do big data updates where we're updating lots and lots of things when we import data for our customers. So right now there's not a way to modify data in LiveDB and also like without telling all the clients about it right away. So we're thinking about trying to figure out a way to do writes without doing publishes. So it's like basically turning off the real-time pub sub, but leaving the data conflict detection. So we haven't done that yet, but it came up yesterday.
Mm-hmm. I think also we've been doing a lot of work on our task queue, and we've mentioned that before. I'm hopeful that we can kind of write up that pattern, maybe like release some example code at some point in the not too distant future. But and that's actually another. Well, I think that does it for announcements. Unless Pavel, do you have an announcement?
Well, we have started on digging the gist of Nate about the access control. We will probably make some kind of a API wrapper around it if we have time, and we'll release it, of course, if we do it.
Cool.
Oh yeah, I took a closer look at the server, the Derby query module that you guys made.
Yeah.
And it looks pretty good. I think I'm gonna try it out for the stuff I'm doing with reports.
Yep. Also, like another announcement is we recently tried the Racer Highway in production, and it performs really good. So we can say now that you can use it in production pretty much like without any downsides. It works the same way as Browserify, but faster, and actually like even more reliable.
So that's the WebSockets implementation?
Yes, it's a WebSockets implementation which falls back to the browser channel if it doesn't support WebSockets.
Does it do reconnects?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Okay.
There was recent change where Arthur added reconnections, so now it also supports reconnections.
Yeah, I think that was the big thing that was missing originally, but yeah, maybe we should test that, Ian. I mean, we've definitely been wanting to switch to WebSockets for a while, and it's just been one of those things where if it's not broken, don't fix it. But yeah, there are some definite issues with load balancing long polling on, especially with Elastic Load Balancer, is really tricky because they have pretty limited options in terms of how you can set it up, and so we've run into issues where certain servers have gotten too many clients stuck to them, and then there's no way to fix it without doing some crazy stuff that is not ideal. So WebSockets, given that most of our users actually their browsers support WebSockets, are actually a lot easier to work with from a load balancing perspective because you have to think about all that.
Yep, that's right. And if it doesn't support WebSockets, then they will fall back to browser channel and they're golden, so it should be fine.
Cool, yeah. We should look into that. Maybe I'll ask Kevin to think about it.
So, sweet. So let's move on to the question section. I have a quick one that I've been thinking about. Basically, I know, so we talk a lot about not needing to do AJAX or direct RPC because with Racer we can do stuff through the data, but there's still times where you just want to make a REST call or expose a simple REST API, and is it worth making a component or a Derby plugin that just gives you a nice AJAX or XML HTTP request wrapper? Because I found myself copying the same 15 lines of code a couple of times to do it, because I don't want to include jQuery just to do AJAX requests, but what do you think?
There are other libraries that do AJAX and just AJAX. There's a bunch of them.
Just use request or something?
You can use Super Agent by the TJ Holloway-Chuk.
Which one?
Super Agent.
Super Agent.
Super Agent.
It's not bad. I've used it before. The other thing is, what was I thinking? So Racer has this really ghetto thing that's hacked on top of the way Share uses browser channel to try and send messages, which I wrote for Derby internally, mostly just for reloading shit. But Joseph mentioned he wanted to make a proper RPC interface on the next version of Share on 0.8. So whenever that happens, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I wanted more is like things that are kind of like outside of our app, or yeah, just asking for things that have to run on the server sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, still sometimes Ajax is a good thing to do because you want to do a request to an external API, or you might need to do it because you need to upload data. So there's all sorts of reasons why Ajax is still relevant, even with WebSockets.
Yep. Cool, that's my question.
But there's probably more. I mean, Super Agent's the one I've used too, Pavel, so that I know it works, but there's probably others.
Nice.
Any other questions?
We use Ajax post and get requests. Like, yes, it requires jQuery, of course. I don't know if it makes sense for us to omit this the Ajax.
Yeah, like sometimes we didn't actually got rid of the jQuery yet from our project. We used it for a plugin to upload files. And there is like some kind of a jQuery file uploader, but it's pretty messy, so we're going to use just your component to upload stuff. It looks much better. And so yeah, and I guess in this case we'll just move to the super agent. It looks like more elegant solution compared to the whole jQuery code.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with using jQuery. It's just the only thing that kind of bothers me about it is once you include one thing that uses jQuery, you suddenly got all of jQuery, and Derby duplicates a lot of what jQuery does, and so this is the whole micro frameworks debate against things like jQuery and Derby. To be fair, is that it is annoying when you just want one thing and you need to include 400K of uncompressed JavaScript.
Right.
Or I don't even know what jQuery is, but it's a lot. And having read the source, it's kind of shocking how much stuff is in there.
Yep.
And also, if we're talking about jQuery and D3 also covers some jQuery stuff, and I'm also working on making everything using D3 without, like Nate said, when you're using jQuery, you need to plug many redundant functionality. So maybe it's sort of question for Jan. Have you been working with while working with D3? Have you troubles with jQuery, or you think that D3 covers everything that jQuery does? Not everything, but what is needed commonly.
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing is that jQuery, D3, and Derby all provide ways to bind data to the DOM or to manipulate the DOM. Really, with D3 and jQuery, they kind of have a small wrapper around the native query selector method. And so if you just use query selectors, then you don't really need all of D3 or jQuery. And then with D3 and Derby, like the way I illustrated with those bar charts, right, you can either let Derby handle the data to DOM binding, or you can let D3 handle it. And there's trade-offs in both situations. So the other thing that's kind of interesting is somebody did split up D3 into a bunch of little modules, and they put them on NPM. I can find a link in a little bit. And so what that lets you do, though, is pull just the functionality of D3. That's there's a lot of functions in D3 that are about manipulating arrays, making scales, sort of like data, purely in the data space, right? They have nothing to do with the DOM. And so you can grab those, and you can leave out all of the API if you're, you know, comfortable using Derby or query selectors in that way, or if it's jQuery versus D3, right? Yeah, so I looked at D3 as a tool belt. There's certain functions that are really useful and convenient for transforming data, and then lately I've just been using Derby to bind that transformed data to the DOM. So I don't know if that answers it.
Yes, totally. And you notice that there are separate modules that in NPM that encapsulate the D3 functionality.
Yeah, let's see. Trying to find, yeah. So here is the guy who did this. He works at Twitter. So if you look at his NPM page, you see that he like made a D3 module for, like, there's a bunch of the color stuff, interpolation stuff, which has nothing to do with DOM, time, geographic stuff, geospatial stuff. Well, actually, there's like 90 of these modules, so it's pretty much one for every. He automated it because D3, when you build it, actually, like the makefile-ish thing that he has is, you know, you can tell it which of the modules that you really want. So it can be nice, and, you know, not everything.
Around 90 modules.
Yeah.
So I walked through this.
Okay. All right. So, did you guys want to talk about? I know before we got started, there was a little bit of a discussion about racer models.
Yeah. So there was a thing with cleaning up the documents after they're being unfetched or unsubscribed when they are when they unload from the model. They are not being actually cleaned up from the hidden ShareJS place on the client, and it leads to bloating the client-side memory with lots of those unneeded documents, and also it leads to some very bad bugs that we have experienced with duplication or with documents not being deleted properly. So it actually, like in views, you delete it, so there is no document in model, but it's still being displayed in a view. So, like, we have already discussed it with Nate before this recording started, and he's going to look at it, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it's probably fine to add that cleanup back in short, but the previous thing that I commented out because of was Share had a bug where if you destroyed a document because you were no longer interested in it, and then you resubscribe to it, you often would end up with not having the document, but Racer thinking you did have the document and then never getting the data. So it was this weird thing where if you unsubscribed and then resubscribed to the same thing quickly, you could end up in this state where you just never saw the data, which happened a lot in certain app flows for us. So I don't really know whether it's been fixed, to be totally honest, because it was a bug in Share and it wasn't really that well tracked. But this was a long time ago, so it may have just been fixed in the meantime. So I will try and replicate the old bug, and if I can't, then probably just uncomment it.
Cool. Okay, so I have another question. Actually, not question, but the thing that we Arthur made a pull request for path queries last week that we're fixing when you were trying to make like this analog of joins, right, in Racer.
Yeah.
So actually, it it's not working in a generic case. It only works if you try to subscribe for, if you try to do a query for the referenced path that has this array of IDs. But if you try to reference some kind of a like absolute path, like users dot, like some, like for example games dot particular game ID dot player IDs, and it is not going to work. So it only works. So the reason why it is not working is that in order to subscribe for this like array of IDs, yes, for documents with these IDs, you have to first get another document that has those IDs. So like it leads to the problem of like chicken and an egg. So because when the application is being unbundled on the client, it just restores all of those queries that you did on the server side. It restores them without any order. And usually you have some kind of a order on the server side when you try to subscribe for something, right, in your controller. You first subscribe to like some stuff, then you get like a list of IDs from those from this document that you have just subscribed to, and you subscribe on another stuff, grabbing IDs from this document. So like so those path queries, they actually only work if you subscribe, if you first create a reference. So there is a workaround for it, is to first create a reference to this particular like list of arrays, and only then you should do a path query into this reference. Then it will work.
Yeah, I kind of knew that wasn't exactly the right fix, though it seemed better for the example, so I just said, screw it, we'll just add it. So you're right, it wasn't quite right. The best way to do it, actually, would be to hold off on subscribing at that moment and waiting until the data was properly in the model and then subscribing later. But that looks more complicated, so I didn't do it. But that's the right way to do it, because basically what's going on is that the path subscriptions do the initial subscribe based on the value at that path and getting all the IDs. And then subsequently, as things get added or removed to that set, it subscribes and unsubscribes. So the best way to do it, but if the queries get initialized before the data. So what was happening is that the queries were getting initialized, there was nothing there, subscribing to nothing, and then that was that, and that's why things didn't get subscribed. So the better thing to do would be to sort of say like, hey, I want to subscribe to this stuff, put in some sort of like just simple queue, like some sort of array that's just used for initialization, push those queries onto that queue, then at the end of initialization, go through that, do the actual subscriptions last, and then at the very end, delete the queue, and everything would be all good. But I was kind of in a rush, so I just accepted the pull request. But I can explain that in the pull request if you're still having issues. I was hoping that the hack would work, but if you're still having issues, then you don't want it.
Yep. Okay. So hopefully it will be fixed in some right way. Oh, actually, Jan was also mentioning some kind of a joins that he is working on currently on the server side. He did some kind of a LiveDB pull request recently, right, Jan?
Yeah. So that's more like the dirty queue that Joseph made is so that you can kind of collect documents that are dirty in some way. So in our case, if you can say if an operation is applied to a document snapshot, it will go into this queue of items, and then you can have something that consumes from that queue, takes those documents and does whatever queries or joins, basically in code, and then use those join documents to put them somewhere else. So it's not quite like an ad hoc join, but it's more like setting up an infrastructure to continuously join data in ways that you want, sort of ETL style.
Okay, got it. Okay. Have Blair joined us.
Yeah. Hey Blair, you got any questions for us?
Hi everybody, good to see you again.
Hi.
I not really. I just sort of jumped in to see if I don't really have much going on. I just came to hang out today.
That's cool. That's cool.
I got stuck helping organize a bar camp in Chiang Mai, and it's really exciting. It's just I don't get to enjoy it because I have to leave soon. So just a lot of running around today.
Cool.
Any sort of new and exciting things going on? I know you guys already probably announced everything that you guys have done, but anything that you can do a quick recap on, or?
Well, I mean, I will be posting the notes and the video.
Yeah,
but,
that's perfect.
I
I can watch it then.
I don't think there's. Maybe the most exciting thing for what you're doing is that Racer Highway is working in production for Decision Mapper. That's the WebSocket with the browser channel fallback communication.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I'll rewatch the Hangout and I'll catch up on that way.
yeah, we're currently in the questions section, so we're just taking more questions. I think everyone here might have already asked them, but I want to see. I thought I saw an interesting one on the mailing list the other day. Oh yeah, it was someone asked, and like I know I've known this answer before. But when you get the error where it says cannot submit operation in callback to submit op, like what's the heuristic to look for where that could be happening, right?
Yeah, so I actually asked Joseph to put in some logging of like which document it is in that, and long story short, we decided that errors should probably be objects and not strings, but they're strings right now, and he doesn't want to break the API because there's some situations where you want to check the error message, and so having a unique error message per error was something that he cared about. So we were going to do some sort of non-standard thing for now where you actually expose errors as 2 arguments in share, which whatever is weird, but that will help if I get around to exposing that through Racer as well. So basically it would just tell you what document it is, which would help. The other thing is the way that happens is with specifically the error, the reason it comes about is that if you are modifying something and then you're midway through modifying it and events are being emitted because it was modified, and then you go ahead and modify something else, that is kind of a weird state of history from the perspective of being able to like linearize everything. So Share just throws up and says, I can't handle this. So specifically, if you like have an operation and then have another thing that listens to events and then it does a modification on an event, that can cause this conflict if it happens on the same document. Does that make any sense?
So if you have a model.on some path, you change the thing that triggers that model.on, and then inside that you change the thing again?
Not necessarily the same thing, just any other thing in the same document.
Okay.
So you can't do that. The reason is basically that at that moment in time, you haven't really finished the first application of the change, and therefore you're in a sort of partially version state. It's like you're like somewhere between version 2 and 3, but you're not really at 2 or 3. So it's just kind of like there's not a good way to describe what's going on, and that's why that you can't make another modification at that moment, because you're not really at version 2 or version 3. You're somewhere in between. And so that's where the error comes from. So basically the workaround is very simple. You just put in a timeout or whatever asynchronous thing. You can also build up a queue and then wait until everything's done and then go through the queue, but usually just a set timeout works for most UI interactions. So in short, if you're doing a modification of some data based on when some other data changes in the same document, you need to put some asynchronicity into it.
Gotcha.
Okay, so actually I have another question
Sure.
about on this topic of having something changed in the document and when you want to run something. So is it so for example, in a chat example of Derby examples, you have user IDs grabbed from the actual chat messages.
Yes.
Do you think it's a good practice to do it if the actual chat messages are going to change frequently?
It depends a lot.
So, like, I mean that, like, you know, like if you do a reactive function and you target it to this, like, whole list of those, like, chat messages, right? If we grab this example, and like each of those messages can be changed like lots of times, then the reactive function is going to recalculate itself lots of times.
Yeah, it will. In general, JavaScript is really fast, actually, like surprisingly fast. And DOM manipulation is really slow, surprisingly slow. So most of the time, you can get away with doing stuff in JavaScript that you would think would be slow, but like isn't, as long as it's pure JavaScript and you're just getting data, iterating through it, making some decisions, and then at the end doing something pretty minimal. And in the case of the IDs thing, most of the time it just goes through and finds the same list of IDs and then tries to diff it, and it's the same, and that's pretty cheap. But if what you're doing is changing something that's bound to a view, and there's like thousands of things that are changing at a time, that's going to be really slow, because thousands of things in DOM land is like a whole lot. Thousands of things in a JavaScript object is actually very little. Millions of things in a JavaScript object is a lot, just because JavaScript objects aren't as efficient as some data structures in other languages. Like, darn, we don't have structs, but that's the way it is. So the general rule on these kind of things is don't prematurely optimize, do what's right, and if it's slow, you'll find out about it. The other thing you can do is write it the obvious way and then remove parts of your app. Like, I use binary search a lot. I think it's an underused tool, is remove some of your code. Oh, are things faster now? No? Okay. That's it. It works really well.
Yeah,
Okay.
I feel like binary search is the most elegant computer science concept I've ever learned.
I use it every day. It's great. So for performance stuff, like, the honest answer is you don't know what's slow. You can try and anticipate it, but no one really knows. So what you should do is build it the way that's the cleanest code, the simplest, the most elegant. Simpler code is usually faster anyway. Usually the simplest code is doing something clever behind the scenes to make it fast that you don't even know about. And then when it's slow, then fix it. But don't fix it beforehand.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
But yeah, a lot of reactive stuff tied to a view, yeah, that's going to cause problems. But in that case, it's all tied to JavaScript objects, so it's no big deal.
Well, let's say in this case, so for example, like in case of those chat messages, you're going to calculate the array of users each time, and they're going to be calculated like, let's say, 20 times a second, and you display those users on a view, right? So are they going to be somehow like re-rendered each time when the path with those IDs is going to change or not?
So there's some ways you can tell. So one thing you can do is you can put a console log in your template. So if you just put in double curlies, put console.log, and then a string, that log will only happen whenever that section of the template's re-rendered. So this is something we do a lot, actually. If you, pro tip, if you put in some additional, here, actually, chat. So if you do this, that where you're just logging a string, that'll only get logged whenever the template that you're in gets re-rendered. If you're doing something like this, so there's like a variable in it. If the variable changes, it'll also rerun that because it's an input to the function console.log. So that'll cause the function to output again, even if it wouldn't re-render the whole like area that it's inside of. So it'll re-render either if it's in the area inside of it re-renders or if stuff changes in that case. So generally, when you're doing this, you shouldn't put variables in it, just so that you know what you're doing, you know what you're reacting to. So the or if you wanted to log out every time stuff changes, alternatively, you would just put stuff in. So that could be useful. So you can use that to your advantage. But anyway, the basic gist of things is that you can put stuff in your templates to figure out when they're being re-rendered. And the other thing you can do, which I do all the time, is you can do this is a command that I type into my console all the freaking time. So model on all * console.log.bind console. What that basically does is on any mutation ever, it will call this function. The function it calls is console.log with the arguments that were passed to it. So it basically just logs out all the events. And so you can see what data is being manipulated. If you do this inside of a component, you see all the changes that that component cares about. If you do it at the top level, you see everything everywhere. So, or of course, you can use a pattern that's more specific. So I do this a lot. Usually this is the first thing I do when there's performance problems in an app, is like this, and then the console inside of the views, because those are the source of all your slowness is going to be driven by some event, by some data manipulation. And then you can figure out, oh, I'm modifying the same thing a bunch of times. But Racer has like some pretty good tools to deal with that. So if you use setDiff, that will only set if two things are different. If you use setDiff deep, it'll do a deep traversal, which you may or may not want to do depending like if you're copying the object or not. You can do a setDiff, a set array diff, which will only insert or remove items for an array or do other array operations. So that usually lets you, with relatively minor effort, do a pretty efficient change. So with like your user's example, you could usually use an array diff, which will allow you to do a pretty efficient update.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but it's very useful pro tip. We should place it all over the like FAQ and the guidelines because it will save us lots of time. Okay, so actually on the low level, how does the rective function work? Does it do the setDiff, or it completely changes the value?
Like model.start?
Yeah.
So model.start by default does a setDiff deep, but you can change it. It actually has different modes. So undocumented, but exists. I actually haven't really run into a situation where I've used the other modes successfully, with one exception, which is the array mode. But let's see, where is that? In Racer, FN. I think that the argument is just mode. Yeah, you can, into model.start, you can pass in options, and the options, one of them that's supported is, Sorry, I'm going through the code right now. Yeah. So there's two options you can use to make it more efficient. One is called copy. So by default, it will copy. It'll do basically a deep copy of the output. So every time you modify some data, it will do a deep copy and before it sets the output. This is important in order to be able to do a diff later, because if it's the same object, it'll look like it's the same even if nothing's changed. Or even if something has changed, sorry. So if it's the same object but you change the property, then it'll be bad news. So it copies the output by default. But if you know what you're doing and you're generating a new list every time, you can choose to not copy it. So you can say copy none. Or you can only copy the inputs, or you can only copy the outputs, or you can copy both, depending on what you want to do there. Which one is more efficient mostly depends on whether the output's bigger than the inputs, or the inputs are bigger than the outputs. Obviously, copying less is faster. And then you can set the mode. The mode can be diff deep, diff array deep, array, or set. And so by default, it does diff deep. And that.
So those things are not going to be changed if the object is the same that it was before.
Well, by default, it will make a copy of the object, so it won't be the same. And a diff deep will just figure out what's different, and then it will set what's different. The downside to that is if it's like an array and you just change one thing in the array, and the kind of UI you have is more efficient just to re-render the item. You might want to use an array deep or array diff, depending. But yeah, basically those are. It's usually I use diff deep or array deep, depending on which is cheaper to do. But this is only an issue when you're dealing with pretty large lists generally, and that's when this is modifying.
Can you type out those options so I can put them in the notes?
Yeah. Well, here I'll just I'll put a link to the file, and then you can find it later. It's probably best just to grab the source code.
Got it. Cool.
Cool. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, it was really helpful.
Good.
Okay, because those diff deep, like the output options, when you are copying this stuff on the output or on input or both, it was documented before. It's in the documentation of 0.5 Racer. But those diff deep options, they were not documented. And
oh, they're pretty new, actually.
Okay.
They were quietly added sometime in 0.6.
Okay, well, actually, I ran out of questions. Anyone else have any questions?
I don't.
Cool. Well, no sense elongating this unless anybody has anything fun to show off at the end here.
Not for me.
All right. Coming soon, right?
Yeah, next week.
Well, I could demo it, but I don't know if you guys are interested. That's all. It's you never know. Do you guys? Would there be any interest in seeing what we're working on?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, if you guys have a few minutes, then yeah, I'd love to show it. Hold on. I'm not really prepared to show it at the moment. I'd have to open up a port and do some networking stuff. But next week,
Yeah.
it would be wonderful. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be really awesome. Thank you, guys.
Of course. Thank you, Blaine.
Yeah. So yeah, we don't have much of a question, and Joseph and I haven't really had a lot of time constructing a schedule for us to work on the cursor stuff. Just we've been, both of us have been sort of, I guess, really busy. So there's not much progress on our end. In fact, we're going to probably launch without the collaborative editor, unfortunately, and then we'll just implement it later. But it sounds like you guys are really pushing ahead with Derby these days, so it's great. And it's good to see you guys are,
Doing our best.
Right. Well, I won't keep you guys. Next week, I promise. That'd be wonderful. Same dates, same time, same bat channel, same all that jazz, and I'll see you guys then.
All right, cool, Blair.
Have a good one.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye.
Next week.
See you next week.